Alright, everybody. For today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about supplemental content in game design and how this is a major factor in promoting replayability and variance in rogue-style games and even strategy as well. Now, the last time we've talked about content, we brought up the idea of random versus procedural, and again defining the term variance as the number of unique and different ways a game can challenge a player over the course of how many different runs that are in it. Now, when it comes to content or expanded content in most video games, it's considered a length increaser. If I have 5 levels and I release a 5-level expansion, my game is now 10 levels long. If it took 5 hours to beat, it may take 9 hours. This is content that, again, it adds a length to the experience, but it doesn't change what's already there. This is very similar to MMOs that tend to focus heavily on endgame content as the months and years go on. Most MMO developers do not touch low-level stuff unless it's only for balance or bug-related issues, and instead will just keep adding on more raids, or more loot, or may even just keep raising the level cap. Now, supplemental content, however, is different, and we're going to define it as content in a video game that adds depth without extending the length of your game. So, whatever your playthrough experience in terms of length remains the same. If it takes 40 minutes, 10 hours, or anywhere in between, that remains consistent. Instead, supplemental content will add more elements that can either impact or change how that playthrough goes for each time you play it. And this way, it adds a lot more variance to a title compared to just extending the length. Now, as I said about a minute ago, supplemental content is really great for roguelike style games or any game where you're expecting the player to come back and replay it again and again. Now, when we last spoke about variance, I brought up the Binding of Isaac as a great example of that. And so to mix things up, I have 2 big examples that we'll come back to in a minute. But to stick with the Binding of Isaac for a few more minutes, Binding of Isaac features both supplemental and length extending content. Things such as the Blot, the Void/Delirium fight, and even the shop and the dark room, those aren't examples of supplemental content. Yes, they may or may not appear during a run, but they are still adding length. And the typical run of Binding of Isaac has grown over the years and as more content has been put into it. Before, when you first started playing, a typical run can be maybe 20 to 30 minutes if you don't know what you're doing. Before the last expansion or the last booster pack, that time could be about, 30 to 35 minutes. And now with Delirium in there, and if you have a rarely bad run of that, that could easily take it to 45 to 50 minutes long. However, content such as new room layouts, new enemies, new secrets, new bosses, and new events that can happen on the floor, that stuff is all supplemental. And again, the Binding of Isaac is one of the best examples of that and providing variance on each run. Because again, while I have a typical idea or I have a standard expectation of what's going to happen from one run to the next, everything that's going on in terms of what items I find, what I'm going to experience, is different. And again, that's where supplemental content comes into play. By giving the game a greater pool of options to pick from when it's creating or generating new content, it will add more variance and ergo more replayability without again extending the length. And typically for roguelike or replayable games like this, you don't really want to extend the length too far. Because the more length there is in a game that's meant to be replayed means more time lost if the player fails. This is why you have to be really careful if you're going to build, let's say, a 40 to 50 hour long roguelike. With that said though, getting to the 2 big examples, when I think about supplemental content and how much it can really add to an experience, the 2 kings in my opinion would be Firaxis and Paradox Interactive with their strategy games. Now, I'm more familiar with Firaxis than I am with Paradox, but I have kept an eye on kind of how things develop with their games over the years. But both companies make extensive use of supplemental content for their games. So with Firaxis, for instance, each of the Civilization titles will have usually one or two big expansions. And those expansions, again, will have your typical forms of content. A new Civ that shows up, maybe some quality of life features to the UI. But then it adds stuff like additional great works, or new events, or in many cases, Civilization or Firaxis will add in brand new systems that are then integrated into the core gameplay loop. In one of the expansions, I believe it was for Civ, I want to say 4 or 3, that was when they added in the option to create your own religion. One of the expansions added in the ability to create corporations. Another one did, oh wow, I haven't kept too far up on this. I'm trying to remember. I know one I think may have added in a military great unit or something along those lines. Oh, I remember. I think it was either Civ 3 or Civ 4 added in the whole espionage system on top of that. And again, what we're talking about here, this doesn't add length, or this isn't just adding in a new enemy. This is adding in brand new systems to your game that are then going to become a part of that loop going forward. And if you really want to see how far you can go with that, you can turn to Paradox. Again, pick a Paradox Interactive game that came out in the last decade, go to its store page on Steam, and you will find probably a few pages worth of DLC from top to bottom. And again, it will feature basic stuff like new songs, new tile packs or unit packs. But then their expansions will add in brand new systems, brand new factions that have their own unique rules that are then integrated into the main game. And one of the key elements of supplemental content when it comes to video games is that the base game and where it's at now with all that content are drastically different experiences. And if you want my favorite example of this, again, we can turn to XCOM from Firaxis. With the Enemy Within expansion for Enemy Unknown, Firaxis added in the mech units, meld, again added in new items and enemies, and then added in that rival human faction that can mess with you. And again, those examples, the mech, the meld, and the faction, that is game-changing stuff that wasn't in the original release. And this was expanded on even further with War of the Chosen for XCOM 2. And that one, again, you got the similar elements of new content and expansion. The quality of life features for the UI, new enemies, new items that can pop up. But then you got systems such as being able to send your characters out on raids or missions outside of the core gameplay or the tactical layer. You have the ability for teammates to become friends and maybe fall in love. I don't know if that may be an option, but I'll let the AAR writers figure that one out. And of course, you have the Chosen themselves and the new factions that are added as well. These are elements that, again, they weren't at any part or any point of the original release of XCOM 2 conceived, hinted at, or even just barely integrated. But with that expansion, they become rolled in to the main gameplay experience. And in turn, while an XCOM 2 campaign doesn't grow that much in terms of length, although the Chosen can make things harder for you, it is a lot different now than it was at launch. And that's how you know when you have good supplemental content, by the fact that not only is the game different, but people will feel like they can't go back to the base game anymore because of all the new features and additions that have made the game greater than it was at 1.0. And this is where I feel a lot of indie roguelike or roguelite designers tend to mess up on when it comes to expanding their game. Because when you're building your game around replayable content or replayable experiences, you need to add more supplemental content for the game to pull from in order to keep that variance up. And again, I've played so many rogue-style games over the years where once I beat the game, I don't feel any more reason to keep playing because the experience is not going to be different enough. And maybe the developer didn't keep expanding the game along those lines. Now, to begin to wrap things up for today, to create supplemental content, again, it's based on a game-by-game basis. But Typically, at the low level example of supplemental content, it's giving the player more, or more specifically, giving the game engine more variables to pull from. If my game begins with, let's say, 10 possible weapon drops, maybe with supplemental content we raise up to 15. Instead of 3 biomes, make it 6. Instead of 10 different enemies, make it 15. And again, you can get very creative with supplemental content. And it just comes down to knowing what your game is about and what's going on with your core gameplay loop. Now, with that said, there aren't too many major red flags when it comes to designing supplemental content. The only thing is you do have to keep in mind what your core gameplay loop is, and you have to be careful not to overstep it or downplay it, as in designing a system that makes it worse. Now, there is a greater debate about saving game-changing or massive system reconstruction content for DLC. This is what some people have complained about with the Paradox Interactive model, wherein basically you buy the basic game and that's like the shell, and the game really doesn't come to life until at least 5 to 6 expansions or DLCs afterwards. And again, it really comes down to how you market your game and exactly what you're delivering in that base game. If your base game is great enough and it's a solid, however long experience, then people are going to be more receptive to having more. If you release your base game and it's buggy or there's actual elements that are missing or not fully developed, and then you say, oh, we're going to release that in 6 months for $20 more, you're going to piss some people off with that. But nevertheless, supplemental content is a given for any game that you intend to expand or want to keep growing over how many days, weeks, months, or years of you working on that title. And if you can't think about it, or if you can't think of any ideas, then something is wrong, because there's always more things you can add to existing systems. Now, adding in brand new systems, that is a topic way beyond for our talk today. I may have to get back Chris Park on for a cast to discuss that. Or if we can get someone from Paradox Interactive, I would love to talk to them more. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up for today's critical thought. For the folks at home watching, can you think of games that were greatly expanded on thanks to supplemental content to the point where you can't go back to that base experience? And conversely, can you think of games where the supplemental content actually made the game worse than it was beforehand? Let me know in the comments below, but thanks again for watching, and check back for daily discussions on game design here, and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Till next time, take care. Before we get to the credits, I just want to give a quick shout out to the fans and supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/GWBycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.